time for money and money for goods and services. And this machine drives resource consumption, both the demand side and the production side. Last empirical information that's also a little bit surprising maybe, not such a long time scale, but from 1980 to 2005 or 2008 I think even. How does, that's OECD data from Groningen, how does labor time on, not on the employment, what we always think of, yeah, but in terms of labor hours change, and how does do wages change? And how, and what does that look like in USA, EU, and Japan? These are not very good colors that you can distinguish. But to many surprise, you may see that EU has practically no decline in labor hours in the past 20 years, very little. Japan has, you remember the stories of dying on the workplace for overwork in Japan in the 1980s. So they have substantially reduced their labor time. And the US has increased. Annual working hours per employee, annual working hours per inhabitant. Children, old people, everything included. Then you see that even stronger. Japan and Europe have converged. US is making its population work ever more. If you look at this in terms of wages and profits, same period, same comparison. No, I don't have Japan in there. Yeah, what you see is, again, labor productivity and hourly real wages in Europe have about the same trajectory. Total hours are constant, and profits or non-labor incomes are rocketing. This is even much stronger for the United States. There you have an increasing workload at the same rate of labor, of wages and labor productivity. I show this to you because these numbers are so, on the one hand, I hope that we will be dealing with labor hours per population and not just with conventional employment statistics, because a lot of things that particularly relevant for the relation to the environment you don't see with employment. That's too social a structure. But these numbers don't relate to employment in that direct sense. They show a lot. They show that we have a lot of structural change going on and having happened. And if we are able to incorporate that in our thinking, in our modeling, in our scenarios in this project, we will be able to arrive at interesting insights. We must not be too incremental. We have structural change, such as an energy shift away, or we need a structural change, such as an energy shift away from fossil fuel towards solar energy mainly. We need a production shift towards human resources and capacities. So it is environmentally much more beneficial to invest into humans. You said care, but education is a similar issue. To invest in humans and not in physical entities like infrastructures. And finally, we have to have an institutional shift towards low vulnerability, low maintenance infrastructures. So we have to have enormous innovations on our infrastructures that at the moment, for example, highways consume an ever-increasing amount of materials and energy in the future, the way they are constructed. They really lock us into an increasing energy consumption just for maintaining those systems, yeah? And this we have with a lot of our infrastructures. So this is a pattern we have to get away from. And we need biophysical degrowth, whatever this means for economic degrowth. I'm not going to enter that debate. And biophysical degrowth means lowering energy consumption, lowering use of virgin raw materials. We cannot go on these wild tracks. And in some ways, European self-sufficiency in those very elementary resources. At least this is a major discussion with the European Union that it was incited by that UNEP report, where European Union is strongly involved, a European self-sufficiency in biomass and water. So we cannot live on the rest of the world being naturally such a rich region. Okay, so new framework conditions. That's also very important for our project. Since 2007, we have, resource cost has been declining throughout the 20th century. They have halved in the 20th century, all resources, food, metals, energy, in real prices. This has stopped since late 2007 or something. We have a very volatile but strong increase in resource prices. So there will be an economic incentive to not only save on labor all the time, but really save on resources. This is a support, if you will, a structural support for a transformation the way we are thinking of. Okay, I think I leave it there. You can have a very complex idea about how society interacts with nature. This is the image we use in order you can look at this as a kind of research program where you look at all arrows and try to find out how they work. I won't walk through that with you. I thank you for the chance to talk to you.
Thank you. And please don't go away. Because we reserved actually more time for this presentation than we expected Marina to take in delivery to actually create space for discussion or questions or for interaction generally. So that it's just not one way. So I would now like to open that part. And, on one hand, this might seem like it's relatively far removed from particular details of the research done in work package X and Y. But on the other hand, it's quite important that the research we do bears this in mind, and I would say is linked to this issue in some way. So if you have either general questions or even specific questions, or how is this relevant, or how this might be linked to what you are planning to do in case of especially work packages 2 to 10, this would be the best moment to use that time. And I can see Dr. Schneider raising his hand immediately. So Hilmar, the floor is yours.
For the moment, I have only some clarification issues. Somewhere in part 2, you had a graph showing that energy consumption and population density might be in favor of agglomeration processes. And I'm not 100% sure whether I understood it correctly, but if I have in mind 2 countries of the same population size but different spatial
arrangement.
What does it mean that if the 2 countries have the same energy consumption and you simply divide energy by population density, then you get this type of differences, but it has no meaning.
No, you divide it by population. For example, Finland. Let's take Finland and Denmark. They are pretty similar. They have a similar quality of life, I would say. And Finland has about twice as much resource consumption as Denmark does. Because per capita, and it's plausible because to spread a road network, all infrastructure across a large country like this is a very, very excessive exercise.
But then that was misleading because you were saying population density matters.
No. It's always per capita. And it's for industrial countries, the first 2 bars, and you have low-density countries like Australia, like Finland, like US, Canada. They have twice as much resource consumption for about the same standard of living as, for example, most European countries or Japan. And you have the same thing in the developing countries.
May I have a follow-up question to that? Do we sort of have a more detailed understanding of where these sort of material and energy savings during urbanization come from, or not? Do we know, what types of resources are consumed less as people move from, let's say, rural areas to more urbanization?
Now, this is a very lively research area. Mm-hmm. A lot of things happens there, because the trouble is that, of course, you have a large production processes not in the most densely populated centers, but you bring the commodities into these centers. So in a way, cities are parasitic on their hinterland, and you have to balance these processes out. And this is done there is a lot of methodological development. As far as I can say, it looks as if it would still hold. So even if we include the flows that the cities generate outside of themselves in order to sustain themselves, even then this difference survives. But this is an ongoing and very lively research.
Hilmar and then Daniel.
And it's also related to urban form, for example. Yeah? So cities like the US, cities that are spread out into the landscape, have practically no advantage over other way of living, while dense European cities have really an amazingly low resource consumption.
Okay.
This would even be the driver of agglomeration, because it's cheaper to achieve energy in agglomerated areas.
Yeah, it refers to transport, to all sorts of services. I mean, you can imagine if you use the same sewage canal for 100,000 people, this is much, much more advantage over using it for 300 as you do with the village. Yeah?
So that would actually imply, before I give the floor to Daniel, that if, as you are saying, the prices of all raw materials and energy are we are seeing a trend increase, that would mean actually this sort of cost...
have been doubling in the last 5
years. And
years.
if it's considered, that would mean actually the cost benefit of urbanization should be increasing, actually, would follow from the Daniel.
Yeah, actually, that was something which I found remarkable. You did not have any pricing there. Mm-hmm. Just talked about physical quantities. And I was wondering if one looks at, for example, the energy price in terms of hours worked. How many hours do you need to work in an industrialized country for 1 ton of oil, or more broader for material use? How would that picture look like, and could one imagine that that is one of the driving factors behind the different periods of different growth rates of these ratios that you showed in relationship to time and energy use?
You know how difficult it is to have good economic indicators over things like a century or 2 centuries. Yeah, that's a problem. Yeah, if we look at purchasing power parities, yeah, if we do it that way, it seems to be so that the price of resources has declined by 1/2 at least, so 50. It hasn't half, but 50% decline. Yeah, in the past century. But PowerPoint parities is not exactly how many hours would you have to work for it. It's close to it. It's close, but it's not the same.
Yeah, but, sorry, you have for, let's say, just coal, just petroleum, you have very long time series. And certainly for these periods, different periods you showed after World War II, you have nominal wages.
Yeah.
You divide the two.
Yeah, then you are at purchasing power parities. Then you end up with the PPP. Right, so that's exactly it.
Then you can calculate easily for at least 100 years.
But what it would show, I would expect, is that actually compared, per 1 hour work, the energy got actually even much cheaper, because if you saw that the sort of the price, the real prices have been declining almost until recently, and if the wages have been increasing faster than prices, at least in industrial countries, quite substantially, of course, then that would mean that the actual sort of the number of time you have to work per 1 ton of oil probably went down
even more
than
the PPP.
And the question was, 73 is a trend changer.
Yes, there is a strong trend changer.
Right? In terms of the material use and so on. Is it also a strong trend changer in terms of these variables which I mentioned?
No, interesting it's not. That's there is a short peak in price, in energy price, and that comes back to normal more or less immediately afterwards, yeah, just a few years afterwards. So this is very interesting that this decline, this reduction in energy and material use in highly developed industrial countries is not matched by economic indicators. It's really a separation between continuing economic growth and prices and stabilizing use of materials and energy. That's, I mean, we are trying to fix that with all sorts of indicators to really go more deeply into it, because it's amazing.
Tomáš?
Tomáš Sirovatka, Masaryk University. I have one basic, I would need one basic explanation, which is about socio-metabolic regime. If I understand it well, this concept is based on distinguishing how much raw materials are consumed, this is first criterion, and the other one is what sorts of energy consumption are used. And if it is a case, I don't understand fully why some sorts of energy were left aside, like nuclear energy or water, solar, wind energy, since this is very crucial for sustainable societies. And if we would correlate the economic indicators which you used, the results would probably look differently if we include all sorts of energy consumption.
I have well, let me.
Issue I'm not much familiar with data, but I would estimate.
There is in this figure that I showed you on energy. Oh, sorry, on energy increase. It's there. Yeah, there's these sources that you were talking about. I'm sorry. You can see them, but they are such a minute slice that they don't impress anybody very much. Yeah, they are included.
The red.
Yeah, the red one is hydro, nuclear, geothermal energy. Yeah, this is natural gas, oil, coal, and biofuels. Yeah, it's not biofuels, but technical energy based on biomass. It's wood, basically. Yeah, mainly. And there you see it's a very, very small slash. And of course, I agree that the transition that we are heading now has to take a lot of care of these changes. Yeah, but I was explaining transitions in terms of the past, and there we have this transition from biomass to coal, and then from coal to oil. And I didn't go into the coal-oil transition. That also makes major transformations, but I didn't want to go into so much detail. But you're completely right that you have to look at these new energy fractions, and of course, but we have to do both. We have to reduce that total amount and increase the red, and maybe not the nuclear. We could have a debate on this, but much of the rate, But you see, it's a very small slice, and in the agrarian societies, a lot of